Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of True Crime Crafting Time with OMG Crochet and Crafts. My name is Robin. I'm obsessed with true crime, and I've never met a craft that I haven't fallen in love with. So I had this wild idea that I would combine the two and make something beautiful while I talk about something terrible. For this series, I will more than likely be sitting and spinning using Mabel or Spinderella. Either one, depends where I'm sitting, where I'm set up. This is Mabel, by the way. I don't know how much you can see of her in this shot, but this is Mabel. Spinderella is in my office. Yes, so I will be spinning some yarn. This yarn is to knit myself a cardigan. It is a merino and Angelina blend that I blended myself on my drum carder. Maybe at some point we'll do a true crime crafting time with a drum carder. The options are endless. Anyways, sorry, tangents. For now, I'll be spinning yarn and then plying yarn and then knitting with said yarn while telling you about some of my favorite true crime stories. This one in particular, I'll give you, before I've got a script, by the way, so I might occasionally be reading said script, but I'll give you a bit of a backstory on this one. Earlier this year, I was staying with some friends, and we started watching a TV program called To Catch Me a Killer. This is based on the book of the same name by Mickey Pistorius, who was the first criminal profiler in South Africa, first ever female criminal profiler, but that's in the script later. So pretend like you didn't hear it this time. Anyways, that is where this very first story comes from Mickey Pistorius. She's a fascinating lady. But let's dive into this one. So in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was a suffocating cloud of terror that hung over the Cape Flats in Cape Town, South Africa, as the country navigated through the turbulent and violent final years of apartheid. There was a different kind of monster hunting in the shadows of the railway lines. 22 young boys disappeared, and 22 bodies were found dead, buried in shallow graves with their hands bound behind their backs. The media called him the Station Strangler. In 1995, the police claimed they had caught him, and a school teacher named Norman Afzal Simons was sentenced to life in prison. So, was that the case closed? Let's find out. Let's talk about the Station Strangler. So, to understand the terror, you'd have to have a look at the hunting grounds. Now, I don't know how much any of you would know about apartheid. It was evil, vile time, and a shame. Yeah, a shame on South Africa. But during apartheid, the South African government relocated non-white citizens to the Cape Flats. Now, this area was under-resourced. It was deeply impoverished, and highly policed for political dissent, but largely ignored when it came to local crime. So between 1986 and 1994, a terrifying pattern emerged where young boys aged between 9 and 13 years old would go missing near the railway lines. And days later, their bodies would be discovered. And the signature was chillingly consistent with asphyxiation, signs of sexual assault, and a very specific ritualized burials. The boys, again, were always found face down in shallow graves with their hands bound behind their backs. The community was living in absolute terror. Parents walked their kids to school, clutching onto weapons. Vigilante groups were patrolling the railway lines, and the police were under immense pressure to find the culprit. But they were entirely out of their depth. And then in 1994, a 10-year-old Elroy Van Rooyen disappeared. He vanished. But unlike the other victims, Elroy was last seen alive in the company of a man at the railway station. And witnesses provided a description. And then, acting on a tip, Norman Simons, who was a primary school teacher, was arrested. So, by all accounts, Norman Simons was an unlikely monster. He was soft-spoken. He was well-educated. He spoke several languages. He was highly regarded by his colleagues. But behind closed doors, prosecutors painted him a picture of a deeply disturbed man wrestling with his own sexuality, with childhood trauma, and severe psychological fractures. In 1995, Simons stood trial, which is where the narrative begins to splinter, because Simons was never actually convicted of being the Station Strangler. So just let that sink in. Despite the media narrative, Norman Afzal Simons was tried and convicted for one murder, for Elroy Van Rooyen, and the one count of kidnapping as well. And the state just simply did not have the physical or forensic evidence to definitively to tie him definitively to the other 21 murders. Now, the evidence in Elroy's case was based on eyewitness identification at the station and a controversial confession which Simons claimed was beaten out of him by the police. Also, the eyewitness parade, the identity parades. The identity parades used by the police were later heavily criticized by legal experts. But Simons maintained his innocence regarding Elroy and explicitly denied being the Station Strangler. Yet, the judge sentenced him to life plus 25 years, stating that the public needed protection from him and implying heavily that he was the serial killer that the city feared. So Simons went to prison, and almost overnight, the station killing stopped. So for many people, that was proof enough that the boogeyman was in jail. But for the families of the other 21 victims, there's no justice, there's no closure. Those 21 cases still remain unsolved to this day. Now, if you're a fan of true crime, the name Mickey Pistorius might ring a bell. Bear with me, just counting. The name Mickey Pistorius might ring a bell, not just because of her legendary status as South Africa's first criminal profiler, and the first ever female profiler worldwide, but because of a dark, twisted historical coincidence in her family tree. Now, Mickey Pistorius is the aunt of Oscar Pistorius, who was the Paralympic and Olympic Blade Runner sprinter, who dominated the headlines in 2013 because he murdered his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day. None of that relates to this case. I just thought it was interesting and wanted to share it. But the Station Strangler hunt was Mickey Pistorius's first case with the South African police force. And on her first few days, she was on the sand dunes of Atlantis and Cape Town, where the body of a young victim had been found. And while she was there, the wind shifted the sand, and another hand, they found another body, they found another victim. And Mickey noted the immense sadness that she felt, knowing that she was no longer dealing with textbooks, and this was real life horror. Mickey used a technique that she dubbed synesthesia, which, hang on, I've got it written down here. Cryptesthesia, an intense, empathetic, psychological immersion to build a profile of the killer. So she told detectives really early on in the case that the killer was likely somebody that the boys trusted. He was highly intelligent, and that he would blend seamlessly into the community. So when the police arrested Norman, Mickey was brought in for investigation and interrogation. But even she couldn't link the other 21 victims to Norman. And then fast forward 3 decades. Under South African law, bear with me. Sorry. Under South African law, prisoners who were sentenced to life before 2004 were automatically eligible for parole after they'd served a certain number of years. Now, at this point, Norman had served 28 years of his sentence. He was in his late 50s, reportedly frail and deeply religious. And as a result, the Department of Corrections approved his parole quietly. And then when it was leaked, the Cape Flats erupted. There were protests. There was the community felt completely betrayed, because as far as they were concerned, a serial killer had been behind bars for 28 years and he was going to spend the rest of his life there. And the families of the victims weren't consulted about the parole. This was done without talking to anybody. Even Elroy's mother said she felt so distressed that the pain felt just as fresh as if it had just happened. And then as a result of this, the government tried to sort of ease the tension, calm the waters, and they implemented the strictest parole conditions in South Africa's history. So Norman was sentenced to house arrest in Parow, which is a suburb in Cape Town. He's not allowed to speak to the media. He's not allowed to leave the house without permission. He is barred from any contact with children. What was the other things? Barred from any contact with children. And he has to undergo ongoing psychological evaluation. But his release from prison did kind of tear open like a 30-year-old scab, forcing the country to confront uncomfortable and lingering questions about whether he actually was the Station Strangler, is the Station Strangler, or did they catch the Station Strangler, or did they just catch a convenient scapegoat? Because over the years, several investigative journalists and criminal profilers have openly doubted that Simons acted alone, if at all, in the other 21 murders. Even Mickey Pistorius said that while Simons did fit aspects of the profile, the lack of physical evidence just left a gaping hole in the narrative. And then some theories suggest that a second killer was at work. And others believe that the pressure on the apartheid era police just meant that they forced the pieces of the puzzle to fit Simons, just to quiet the public fury. So yeah, you've got, if Simons didn't do it, it means a serial killer walked free for decades, still walks free, while the community's grief was brushed aside. Whereas if he did do it, then a prolific monster is currently living out the final years of his life, chilling in suburbia, just watching television, while 22 families have got empty seats at their dinner table. So that's all the information I've got on this episode. I want to say thank you very much for joining me. This is the very first episode. I fear there are going to be some growing pains, some bumps in the road, but onwards and upwards, we can only make improvements from here. So yeah, if you guys could press all the buttons, like, share, subscribe, comment. I would really like it if you could make some suggestions of other true crime stories you would like me to talk about. If if you have any questions about what I'm doing, the spinning, etc., I'll happily talk about that as well. But yeah, press all the buttons. Send me some comments about who you would like me to talk about next. I'm hoping to do at least one of these episodes a week. Maybe more. But yeah, for the time being, thank you so much for joining me. What did I say? For joining me while I make something beautiful and talk about something terrible. I hope you guys have a lovely day. I will catch up with you all again soon. Bye.